Hi, my name is Jordan Biggs, and I'm here today to talk about Portugal and to provide specifically some information on their business customs and other things that you might be unfamiliar with as an American. So, whenever you go over to Portugal for the first time, it typically takes 3 to 5 weeks to set up a business meeting with someone in Portugal. And this is a common practice, so it's good, don't be offended if people take a long time or you feel like you're not being paid attention to. They do just take a while to process things. But once you finally get the meeting set up, whenever you first arrive, the first thing you want to do is be, 5 or 10 minutes early. Even though over there they don't pay as much attention to time, and punctuation isn't as big a deal as over here. But it's still a good idea to be early since you're a guest over there. So once they finally do arrive, and first thing everyone does is shake each other's hand and introduce themselves. When introducing yourself, if you have a professional title like doctor, the Portuguese typically introduce themselves as Dr. Mr. Smith. They include that professional title as well as a Mr. or a Mrs. This often catches people off guard, and it kind of sounds weird to us, but that's just how they decide to do it. Portuguese also typically hand out business cards, so even if your company doesn't, do that, it's a good idea to bring a sizable stack, enough for everyone, to distribute your contact information and things like that. And then after all that's been done, people typically sit for at least 5 or 10 minutes and they just sit and talk and make small talk. And this is because the Portuguese really value a personal relationship with someone over a professional relationship. So when they make business decisions, a lot of times there are personal feelings involved, and it's not just what is best for our company. It's how do you feel about it in personal relationships. And that's something that we do see here a little bit, but it's much, much more heavily emphasized over in Portugal. And to form this, personal kind of bond, one thing that is really good to do is to learn a bit of Portuguese before you go over there. And if you do that and you can speak it well, it shows that you are interested in them and that you took the time to learn something about their culture and educate yourself. And this is something that they really do see in a highlight, especially with the American stereotype of kind of being snobby. So, keeping all these things in mind, there are a few things to Portuguese business that aren't so good and that have created problems in the past, and it's mainly involved tax fraud and things like that. So just recently, back in 2009, a scandal broke where the prime minister was even involved, and the scandal involved around tax fraud and money laundering through various businesses. And then the trial went on trial in 2011, and people often criticize the trial because of lack of evidence, which has been suggested that maybe even more corruption became there, and that's where all the evidence went, and that's why people can't convict anyone. Um, while this was going on, Portugal had a citizen on the Eurojust, which is the EU's kind of judicial branch, and another scandal broke after this, and it turned out that a Portuguese judge on the Eurojust had been trying to intimidate reporters into not reporting the scandal or reporting it in a way that didn't make the prime minister look bad. So this isn't something that just goes on in Portugal, it's throughout the EU. And this kind of falls back on that thing where Portugal really values personal relationships, and if they feel that they can cheat the law and know that they're able to trust the person they're cheating the law with, they have a higher likelihood of doing it than most people would. So inner circles are a big thing to be aware of over there, and you don't want to get into an inner circle like that where something like that could be happening and you could be implicated, and that could look very bad for everyone involved. So if you want to keep away from these things, it's a good idea to know what's going on in Portugal in terms of the economy and what is looking good for them and what isn't looking good. So in the summer of 2011, several countries in Europe got a bailout, and one of these was Portugal. So they have been falling on some tough times, and there have been a lot of struggles, but it's starting to level out, and they are starting to kind of get their footing and get back on their feet. Unfortunately, they have taken a hard hit, with projections of unemployment rising in 2014 to 14.8%, 2%, which is extremely high, especially over there and here. So employment is something to be concerned about, even though throughout the past Portugal's had relatively cheap labor. Another thing is their deficit, and that's one of the main reasons that they opted for that bailout. And right now their deficit's at about 10%, but part of their bailout does stipulate that they work on their deficit to reduce it. And if you are going to be doing business with Portugal, I printed out a few charts that depict some things that you might want to be aware of if you are going to go over there and get into business with them. So this is a pie graph that explains Portugal's main exports, the majority of which are service industries and orientated to things like that. But I'll hand those out at the beginning or at the end. And there's also, I printed some out for exports, imports by country, and then this one is probably the most useful one, and it's about the investments that are made into Portugal and what sectors and things like that. So you can see that there are a lot of different sectors that are invested in Portugal, but this blue one, the main one, is wholesale and retail. So that's what people do mainly invest in over there. And then, this is by country, which countries import and which countries export things to Portugal. And when you look at it, you notice that the United Kingdom is on here, but not the United States. The United States doesn't really take any of Portugal's exports, but on another graph what I have of what countries Portugal imports things from, Portugal imports about 3% from the United States, which isn't very much, but it is some. So there are opportunities over there that people can have and that business can invest in, especially right now when everything is cheap, they can get their foot in the door. So if you are going to try and do that, you want to remember the Portuguese business customs that we talked about with being respectful and taking the time to get to know them and get to know their culture and show them that you are interested and you do have a vested desire to do business together. And if you do, it's important to remember that corruption does happen over there, especially when things are bad like they are right now. So you want to be aware of possible corruption to keep yourself and your company out of that. And then you also want to make sure that you do look at the markets and what's good in Portugal and what's going up and what's going down and what's going to be the most beneficial for your company in the long-term future.